We're into our second week of the Crucible, and you were supposed to have read Witchcraft in Salem, so you could get an idea of exactly what was going on in the court proceedings, and you could see how crazy it was. I also wanted you to read Act 2 or watch the movie up to that point, just so you can get an idea of how these characters are, what's going on in their worlds, how unbelievably insane it was. Whenever I teach this, it's hard for so many students to grasp that this is not fiction. Well, I mean, yeah, it's drama, but the characters are real. The events really happened. This is how the trials went down. And so they can't believe, the students that I teach, they can't believe that this could be a court of law, what was happening. Some things that I hope you've noticed are especially the character of John Proctor and Reverend Hale. Reverend Hale is the most dynamic character in the entire play. He has a complete character arc. He goes from one side to the other. It's not a 360. That's a misconception. If you have a 360, that means you go back to exactly how you are. No, a 180 is when you change. Go from one way to the other. That's a 180. Okay. 360. Okay. So Reverend Hale here came in and in the first act, and he was all about it and saying we're going to get rid of Satan, we're going to do this. Lucifer has his grips into Salem, etc. And now when you see him in Act 2, Miller describes him as almost having, wearing his guilt on his face. He has a very downtrodden countenance. And it's obvious that he isn't 100% certain of what's going on here. And when you get into the courtroom, things can blow up even more in the third act. Proctor, on the other hand, is being pushed and pushed and pushed to go and tell the court what's going on, to tell the court that Abigail said that there really isn't any witchcraft. They were just quote unquote sporting, which means playing around, etc. And he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do it. The reason why he doesn't want to do it is because he doesn't want to come face to face with what's going on, and he's almost pretending like it doesn't exist, it doesn't happen. Y'all, this is an extremely good metaphor for McCarthyism, for what Miller wrote, McCarthyism, and also just what's happening in America, around the world today with George Floyd. So many people just want to, pretend like, that's happening. It doesn't affect them, so whatever. Proctor's living out on his farm. He's not, thinking about it. If something's going on somewhere else, it's not affecting him, whatever. Well, eventually it's going to affect him. It's going to come right to his doorstep. And he doesn't want to go into town and face what really he started. I mean, you think, well, how did he start this? Well, Abigail wanted Tituba to do a charm to kill Goody Proctor. She has a deep infatuation with him. You're going to discover later on, if we haven't already figured it out or have already read that far, that Proctor he did sleep with, he had an affair with Abigail when Abigail was working for him. So yes, he isn't the one who started all this witchcraft, but his actions started the roller coaster that became Abigail. He doesn't want to go and he doesn't want to face it. Well, he has to face it because Hale comes to his house. Hale says, your wife, Elizabeth, has been named. Then Herrick and the jailers show up. They take Abigail. They take Elizabeth because Abigail has charged her, has said she's a witch. So it came right to his doorstep. And what he's been trying to avoid, now he can't because it's time. All right, let's go into Witchcraft in Salem, and we can see how the court proceeds. See here, if you have seen the movie, if you've read the play, you see how they were acting, and these girls. So it says right here, 1692, a series of strange events that cannot be fully accounted for today broke out in the Puritan settlement of Salem, Massachusetts. Accusations of witchcraft quickly spread throughout the town, and many, especially the women of Salem, feared they would be next. Proctor has this epic line, one of the most famous lines And he says, I'll tell you what's walking the streets of Salem. Vengeance is walking the streets of Salem. We've got to a point here to where it's not a matter of witchcraft anymore. People are seeing that they can get back at or get something for themselves out of accusing someone else. You see how it's intimated that Putnam has accused one of his neighbors of being a witch, wizard, whatever, so he can inherit his land. He can get his land at auction for cheap. Should the devil had come to Salem in 1692, young girls screaming and barking like a dog, strange dances in the woods, this was behavior hardly becoming of the virtuous teenage maidens. The town doctor was called onto the scene. After a thorough examination, he concluded quite simply that the girls were bewitched. Now the task was clear. Whomever was responsible for this outrage must be brought to justice. And it goes in here and it talks about how the girls would act and how they would throw themselves on the floor. And you could see the way the girls acted in the movie, how they throw themselves on the floor and how they would say that so-and-so was sending their spirit out against me, and voodoo dolls and all kinds of things like that. That was like how Abigail tricked them into thinking that Elizabeth had bewitched her by sticking a needle in a doll that Mary had made. Mary is a very important character. We'll get more to her in a minute. Now, evidence here admitted in such trials was of 5 types. First, the accused might be asked to pass a test, like reciting the Lord's Prayer. This seems simple enough, but the young girls who attended the trial were known to scream and writhe on the floor in the middle of the test. It's understand why some cannot pass. You can't understand, y'all. This is literally these people, you're on trial for being a witch, and death is a punishment. And they really didn't even want, they said that basically if you confess that it would be evidence that you were trying to get right with God, and they wouldn't hang you or they wouldn't kill you. But you went in presumed guilty because they said that, wisdom comes from the mouth of babes. In other words, to them, the judges, there's no way that these girls could lie. Well, we know teenagers lie all the time. I mean, we know that children lie all the time. It just comes natural. But to them, it's like, no, it's impossible. It's a completely different culture, completely different period of time. And mob mentality and fear just got the better of people. Last was the confession. Confession seems foolhardy to a defendant who is certain of his or her innocence. In many cases, it was the only way out. A confessor would tearfully throw himself or herself on the mercy of the town and court and promise repentance. None of the confessors were executed. Part of their repentance might be, of course, including to help convict others. Ties in with McCarthyism. Ties in with so many things that we still see around the world today. All right. Let's go down here. Answer our questions. Number 1. The answer to number 1 is C. Which of the following describes the central idea of the passage? The town of Salem believed it was being plagued by witches, and in their panic they held a number of unfair trials. Number 2. What evidence backs that up? C. 20 people and 2 dogs were executed for the crime of witchcraft in Salem. 1 person was pressed to death under a pile of stones for refusing to testify. Number 3. The answer is A. Which of the following statements best describes how the conditions in Salem contribute to the development of the witch hunts? Salem was a strictly religious community that had suffered many recent tragedies, and these conditions created an environment of fear and paranoia. Y'all, tie that to McCarthyism, what you've learned about the war, 2 wars, basically within 20 years, World War I, World War II, not wanting to go into something else. Fear of the Russians. We have this today. People are fearful. They do things that they otherwise wouldn't do. 4, which statement best captures the author's point of view of the trials? The answer is C. All right, now down here, how do paragraphs 4 through 8 contribute to the development ideas in the article? Look, paragraphs 4 through 8 talk about the evidence and how ridiculous it was and how basically there's nothing you could do about it. You came in presumed guilty, and there really wasn't anything you could do other than confess, and then you'd save your life. And you can see how a lot of people would confess to save their lives, and they would turn their back on their beliefs and their ideals and their faith, and then they would turn their back on their neighbors, and they would result in more suffering and more death of other people. We're going to get to Act 3, and Proctor makes a decision, and Francis and Giles make decisions that cause harm, but they do it for their principles. All right, down here, after reading the text, what do you think caused the Salem Witch Trials? That's up to you. We talk more about it. Why? Fear, basically. I think fear and vengeance. Fear and anger and vengeance. Number 2, what might have caused a person to accuse another of witchcraft? We've already established that. The movie does a very good job of showing it, as does the play itself. Anger. I'm angry at you, and I'm going to call you a witch, and we're going to get back at you. Or greed, or just simple fear. Number 3, the Salem Witch Trials is a period largely considered a case of mass hysteria, phenomenon in which collective fear and paranoia or threats, real or imagined, overtakes the behavior of the community. The context of this idea in the overall text, what are the effects of following the crowd? Oh, and we've talked about following the crowd ad nauseum in this. I hope by this point you've been able to understand it, and we've actually seen this exact question before. Context of the passage, how does fear drive action? And this is it. Fear can lead to anger, and anger can lead to hate, and hate can lead to suffering. All right, let's wrap this up.
So that's the end of Act 2. We've wrapped all that up.